Ahaziah was 22 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 1 year. His mother was Athaliah, or maybe Athaliah, I don't know. Anyway, a granddaughter of King Omri. Ahaziah also followed the evil example of King Ahab's family, for his mother encouraged him in doing wrong. He did what was evil in the Lord's sight, just as Ahab's family had done. They even became his advisors after the death of his father, and they led him to ruin. It's really no surprise he would do that. His father didn't worship God. His mother didn't worship God. His mother's probably a big part of the reason his father didn't worship God. Not only that, but he's being encouraged by his mother to not follow God. What's up, cool people? My name's Matt. Welcome back to our Bible study. Okay. So we are now looking at 2 Chronicles chapter 22. Last chapter was about King... I've been pronouncing it Jehoram. I don't know if that's the best air quote pronunciation or the most accurate, but anyway, talked about him. He was a bad king, just all around, in a whole bunch of ways. Wanted to ask, why is it talking about Judah alone? What happened to the other tribes? So, funny you should say that. 1st and 2nd Chronicles are specifically written to the exiles of Judah, who, after Judah got taken over by, I think, Babylon, they weren't necessarily all living in the same area that they were before. They might have been kind of scattered. But in any case, 1st and 2nd Chronicles is written, I believe, by Ezra, who would later kind of lead a spiritual revival of sorts for these people, help them get back to God, and even kind of serve as an impetus for them heading back to the temple and rebuilding that. And then there's also Nehemiah, who comes around a similar time and leads an effort to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. So since this is focused on Jerusalem and Judah just as like a recap of those events, that's why it's only talking about Judah, not so much other tribes. They had split off, made their own separate kingdom, the other tribes, and what happened to them was an entirely different situation. So, if you want more on the other tribes and the kings that led them, I would go back to definitely 2nd Kings, probably start in 1st Kings for context. 1st and 2nd Kings covers all the kings of all the tribes. 1st and 2nd Chronicles being more of a recap for the sake of the exiles from Judah in order to help push them to go rebuild the temple. That's why it's only talking about Judah. Anyway, so previous king, very bad king, turned the people away from God, died just a really inglorious death. Nobody really celebrated him when he died. Or at least the majority of the people didn't. And a lot of other things, but a lot of other bad things happened to Judah during his reign, such as losing some territory, losing a bunch of wealth. He killed off all of his brothers. Pretty much everyone in his family died except his youngest son. Yeah. And that's how things are going into this chapter. So, here we go. 2nd Chronicles, chapter 22. Then the people of Jerusalem made Ahaziah, Jehoram's youngest son, their next king, since the marauding bands who came with the Arabs had killed all the older sons. So Ahaziah, son of Jehoram, reigned as king of Judah. Ahaziah was 22 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 1 year. Not very long. His mother was Athaliah, or maybe Athaliah, I don't know. Anyway, a granddaughter of King Omri. Ahaziah also followed the evil example of King Ahab's family, for his mother encouraged him in doing wrong. He did what was evil in the Lord's sight, just as Ahab's family had done. They even became his advisors after the death of his father, and they led him to ruin. Pausing there for a moment. Because, I mean, like, it's really no surprise he would do that. His father didn't worship God. His mother didn't worship God. His mother's probably a big part of the reason his father didn't worship God. And not only that, but he's being encouraged by his mother to not follow God. So, yeah, no real surprise there. In verse 1, it says marauding bands of Arabs, possibly, instead of marauding bands who came with the Arabs. Although last chapter it said there were more than just Arabs involved. I think, you know what, let me take a quick look back at it. I think it might have mentioned, like, Egyptians, or, well, okay. Mentioned the Philistines, the Arabs, or Arabs who lived near the Ethiopians/Cushites, so, but still, the Philistines were definitely also involved in that. So, it was more than just Arabs. Also, note there where it says that he was 22, that comes from some Greek and some Greek manuscripts in the Syriac version. Hebrew reads 42. That's quite a bit of an age difference. And like for the youngest son of a guy who only ruled 8 years, and I mean, so Jehoram was 32 years old when he became king. So he was 40 himself when he died. There's no way. There's no way Ahaziah was 42. His father was only 40 when he died. That makes no sense. I mean, unless we're getting a bit symbolic with the ages here. I mean, 22 seems definitely more plausible. So that's probably why the translators went with 22. Now keep in mind, coming from the manuscripts, just because there are Hebrew manuscripts, and Hebrew was the original language that the people would have spoken and written in, that doesn't necessarily mean that the Hebrew manuscripts are the oldest ones we have. And also, like, older, like, unless it was, like, the original writing, which I don't think any of our manuscripts are that people translate from. Like, there's not even necessarily any guaranteeing that just because it was an older manuscript means it's more accurate. Anywho, I digress. So, yeah, 22 seems far more reasonable than 42, especially since there's no translation note tied to Jehoram's age in the prior chapter. Could it be that he wasn't made king right away after his father died? Potentially. It does just say that they made him their next king, but how long would they reasonably have gone without a king? But it doesn't mention any kind of a gap there, so I'm not inclined to assume that there's any kind of significant gap there. Also, again, go back to 2 Kings. That might say more about it, and if it does, I'm just kind of forgetting. Anywho, alright. I don't have any more thoughts on that kind of stuff, so he was the youngest son, maybe some politics. Oh, yeah, I mean, granted, Actually, we'll get into a more obvious example of that a little later in this chapter. I did read ahead a little bit. Or maybe not in this chapter per se, but somewhere between the end of this one and the start of the next one, probably. Okay, anywho, on to verse 5. Following their evil advice, they being, the family of Ahab, since, his own father, any of his uncles, I guess they would have been, and anybody else from that side of the family was pretty much dead. So, following the evil advice of Ahab's family, Ahaziah joined Joram, the son of King Ahab of Israel, in his war against King Hazael of Aram at Ramoth-Gilead. When the Arameans wounded Joram in battle, he returned to Jezreel to recover from the wounds he had received at Ramoth. Because Joram was wounded, King Ahaziah of Judah went to Jezreel to visit him. But God had decided that this visit would be Ahaziah's downfall. While he was there, Ahaziah went out with Joram to meet Jehu, grandson of Nimshi, whom the Lord had appointed to destroy the dynasty of Ahab. While Jehu was executing judgment against the family of Ahab, he happened to meet some of Judah's officials and Ahaziah's relatives who were traveling with Ahaziah. So Jehu killed them all. Then Jehu's men searched for Ahaziah, and they found him hiding in the city of Samaria. They brought him to Jehu, who killed him. Ahaziah was given a decent burial because the people said he was the grandson of Jehoshaphat, a man who sought the Lord with all his heart. But none of the surviving members of Ahaziah's family was capable of ruling the kingdom. Probably because, none of his brothers were left alive. Definitely wouldn't have been typical to give rule of the kingdom to a woman, especially not a younger woman. Although there is subtitled there, but that's maybe a slightly different case. She's not young for sure. Not as young anyway. But I digress. So, yeah. None of his immediate family was really left alive, except his mother. And maybe some extended family on that side. But, again, immediate family, what is there? Any children that he might have had would be very likely younger than ideal for taking on the throne. So, yeah, but maybe he just didn't rule as king long enough for the people to be like, oh yeah, this dude was terrible. So bad he's not worth even, giving a decent ceremony or anything like that. The way they had treated the death of Jehoram, his father. But bunch of notes here. Good grief. So Joram is probably connected with this note. Hebrew says Jehoram, which is a variant spelling, but they probably call this one Joram in order to better delineate between him and Ahaziah's father. But I think the two of them essentially had the same name. And especially if you go back to 2 Kings, I assume it was 2 Kings, there's mention of both of them pretty close to each other, so it was even a more significant thing to try and distinguish the two. But anyway, But this one is King Ahab's son, not obviously his own father, who was dead at this point. Now, note there at the Arameans. It comes from 2 Hebrew manuscripts in Latin Vulgate. Masoretic text reads the archers. That, it's... They're warring against King Hazael of Aram. So yes, they're Arameans. This just might more specifically from the Masoretic text be referring to the Aramean archers. But Joram got wounded in battle. Hebrew there says Ramah instead of Ramoth. Variant spelling though. I mean, the warring was at Ramoth Gilead. Alright, because Jehoram was wounded, King Ahaziah, note there, as in some Hebrew manuscripts, Greek and Syriac versions in Latin Vulgate, most Hebrew manuscripts read Azariah instead of Ahaziah. Didn't that come up before as like a possible variant spelling? Maybe not. It's got to be referring to the same guy anyway. Note there, grandson of Nimshi. Hebrew says descendant of Nimshi. Doesn't necessarily say directly then that he's the grandson. But in any case, still talking about this Jehu guy here, who was literally given a mission by God to, like, basically destroy, kill, get rid of the family of Ahab, or the descendants of Ahab, I should say. Anyway, one last note here in verse 8 before we move on. When it's talking about Ahaziah's relatives, as in the Greek version, Hebrew reads, sons of the brothers of Ahaziah. Happened to meet some of Judah's officials. Okay, like, they would still be Ahaziah's relatives, just kind of extended family. In that case, specifically nephews. So, King Ahaziah has died, and then we move on to verse 10 here. When Athaliah, I'll just pronounce it that way, mother of King Ahaziah of Judah, learned that her son was dead, she began to destroy the rest of Judah's royal family. But Ahaziah's sister, Jehosheba, the daughter of King Jehoram, took Ahaziah's infant son Joash and stole him away from among the rest of the king's children who were about to be killed. She put Joash and his nurse in a bedroom. In this way, Jehosheba, the wife of Jehoiada the priest and sister of Ahaziah, hid the child so that Athaliah could not murder him. Joash remained hidden in the temple of God for 6 years while Athaliah ruled over the land. So, that, ends up meaning that Judah had a queen for about 6 years. Although, like, it kind of doesn't directly say, I mean, it does say she ruled over the land. So, yeah, close enough to saying she was queen. Which, okay, like, in that case, being the mother of the prior king, like, that's about one of the most reasonable cases in which a queen would be. And it doesn't even really say that she was chosen to rule over the land. It's just she went on a rampage against practically anybody else who could have taken the throne. So, because of maybe just because of the power that she wielded, due to being the prior king's mother and other things like that. Yeah. So yeah, Joe here is saying she, meaning Jehoshua, basically made sure that he, Joash, knew who God was. Like, put Joash, yeah, in, I think it, oh yeah, it even says here, Joash remained hidden in the temple of God. Yeah, so, if Joash was basically living in the temple from a young age, you better believe that, A, not only is he more likely to be safe, but he's also very likely to be, taught to worship the Lord. While there was all sorts of other chaos going on, like, the amount of royal assassination that has been going on in the past couple of chapters is kind of ridiculous, honestly. You've basically got nearly one entire generation being wiped out. Between what caused Ahaziah to be the only surviving son of Jehoram, and now this stuff with Jehu and Athaliah, like, so many people who could possibly have ruled over Judah who got killed. And yes, some of it is like revenge killing. Now, note here at Jehoshua, as in parallel text at 2 Kings 11:2. Okay, so yeah, this is... Go back to 2 Kings if you possibly want a little more information on all this stuff. Hebrew lacks Ahaziah's sister and reads Jehoshabeath, which is considered a variant spelling. But lacks Ahaziah's sister. So there's a chance she wasn't really Ahaziah's sister. If she was, it would be all the more motivation for her to want to protect at least one of her brother's sons. Doubly because of it being an infant son. Because of him being an infant son. Grammar. Pronouns. But even if she wasn't directly Ahaziah's sister, it's like you've got this infant who obviously can't fend for himself. Like, you don't want him to die, so you hide him away. And that's really the main thing. Joash is hidden away, living at the temple for 6 years. And that's where it leaves things off in 2 Chronicles 22. I don't really have any other thoughts to add to that at the moment, so I guess we'll leave it there. Alright, so, unsurprisingly, more bad things happen. And now it's like we've kind of gone back a generation in the leadership of Judah, because Ahaziah died and then his mother kind of took over. But there is also hope for a different future for Judah, kind of towards the tail end of this. I mean, you would hope. Now, I realize there are, pastors' kids out there today who are rebellious and don't necessarily follow God like you would think. But it's still, like, that's not necessarily the majority. As always, like and share if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe to the channel and click the bell to get updates when I post new videos. Look down in the description for links to social media pages, Discord server, supporter page, anything you might want as far as keeping up with my internet activities and my videos and interacting with any of that. And otherwise, just leave your thoughts and questions down in the comment section. So that's it for now. Hope you're all doing well. Hopefully I'll see you soon for another video. But whatever the case is, till next time, stay cool, people.